Hi, people. Thank you for stopping by at Building Wealth with Rajiv. Here's my chat with Jim Rogers. Jim Rogers is not a stranger to the world of investing. Legendary investor, he retired in his late 30s, traveled around the world, first on his mobile and then in his car. Jim was candid enough to give his view on so many things on US, on China, on India, on cryptos, on blockchain, and more importantly, where is he putting his money now? I hope you like the content. If you like the content, please follow the channel, press the bell icon so that you know next time when I post something. Please share with your friends. Do write your comments. They mean a lot to me. Now, Jim, look, there's a lot of confusion and it's a continuous confusion we see all over. US forces leaving Afghanistan. And what did you make out of that?
Well, I would hope that America will eventually learn to stop going to war with people. Iran, Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and many others. And none of these things have worked for us. I would hope the people in Washington would finally figure this out. Why don't we just leave people alone? But since we failed again, I'm afraid that, a few months from now, there's going to be more terrorism in Asia because these guys won and they know they won. Is it good for us? No. Is it good for anybody? No. But I'm afraid that's going to be one of the consequences.
And what economic consequences do you see of that? I mean, in Asia or in US or,
Well, I don't think it's going to cause the next recession. We're going to have recessions. Don't worry about that. But I don't think more terrorism. Terrorism has been around for hundreds of years, certainly decades. And, I can remember when the English were constantly having terrorism and it didn't do any good. It didn't stop the economy. Many other countries. So it's bad for the people who suffer. It's bad temporarily for some industries, some sectors, but I don't think terrorism is going to ruin the economy. We will have recessions, and we will probably have recessions fairly soon, Rajiv, but I don't think terrorism will just add to it. It's not going to cause it.
So I know you've been talking about recession for some time, Jim. What's the thesis? I know you talked about high debt and everything. I mean, and it's difficult time. Where are you going with that now?
Am I going what?
Where are you going with recession, with your thesis on recession, right?
Well, what I have said, if you said I've talked about it, what I have said is that we had a recession in 2008. Because of too much debt. We've always had recessions since the beginning of time. We will have more. And that the next one is going to be the worst in my lifetime because the debt is so much higher than it was in 2008. I mean, that seems to me to be a simple statement that the debt is higher, so the recession is going to be worse. That's my view. I don't know when it's going to happen. I guess we have to watch Rajiv to find out when it's going to happen. But no, I mean, America's had the longest economic recovery in American history. So we're getting closer. But I have no idea when it will happen. I wish I did.
No, that's fine. I think the single thesis is dead, right, for recession. But you see other things, Jim, and I'm nobody, no authority in front of you, but I'm kind of investing and I'm looking at these earnings of the companies. 50% growth, 60% growth. I mean, 15 years ago, these kind of earnings were not heard of. If you look at those numbers, the way the economy is prospering and creating employment, it's a bit of a paradox, isn't it?
Well, Rajiv, at the top of a market, everything looks great. Always, everybody says, oh, it's different now. Don't you understand it's different now? It's never different. We've always had, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're never going to have another recession. The Secretary of the Treasury in the US says, don't worry, we'll never have more recessions. We have it under control. Well, she's got Ivy League university degrees. If you believe her, don't believe me. But I know the world has always had recessions. I know that at the top, everything looks great. Everybody says, oh, things are wonderful. Don't you understand? Just as at the bottom, everybody says, oh my God, the world is ending. The world is ending. Never buy stocks again. This is not the first time I've seen this. So yeah, everything's great. And some companies having astonishing results. If you think it's going to go on forever, don't listen to me. Buy those stocks.
You're not very kind of bullish, or you're not very positive on U.S. economy, isn't it?
No. I'm certainly positive on the U.S. economy. They're spending staggering amounts of money, printing staggering amounts of money. Is that good? It's good for right now. And for the people getting all that money, it's wonderful. The question is, I have seen this party before. I know it's going to end badly when it ends, but I don't see any reason that it's going to end now. As you said, and as I said, many people are doing extremely well and having a wonderful time. But Rajiv, if you give me trillions of dollars, I'll show you a very good time. We'll have a wonderful time while it lasts, but I know it comes to an end. Rajiv, it's good to be old in America now because I don't have to pay for it, but I've got teenage children. The problems they're going to inherit are going to be huge.
No, I think about COVID sometimes, and this is a question I have. I think if you see the printing went berserk in COVID crisis. Do you think the government had an option there? No, really.
Did they have an option? And you say not really. In my view, they did. It's usually better to take the pain and start over from a sound base than to build artificial anything. In 2008 and 2009, America refused to, and not just America, but America refused to let people suffer, printed and borrowed huge amounts of money, and everybody said, oh, okay, everything's okay now. But the problems that build up in that kind of situation, when you have to deal with those problems, they're much worse. And that is certainly my view of what's happened with the virus. Sometimes the cure can be worse than the disease. We all are quite happy that things didn't fall apart and the world didn't come to an end. On the other hand, Rajiv, when we have to pay the price, history shows the price is going to be very, very painful for all of us.
And how do we prepare for that then?
Well, you watch Rajiv.
What's your view? How are you preparing for that?
You ask Rajiv, for goodness sakes. Well, you can own. Let's go back. We know bonds around the world are in a bubble.
Yeah.
Bonds have never been this expensive in history anywhere. Property in many places is a bubble. Korea, New Zealand, many places. Not everywhere, but property is becoming a bubble. Some stocks, as I said before, there are many stocks in the US that are having fabulous times. It's not a complete bubble yet because there are many stocks that haven't participated fully, but some stocks are beginning to form a bubble. As I look around the world, the only asset class that is still cheap are commodities. I mean, silver is down 60% from its all-time high. Sugar is down 70%. Oil is down 50%. These are not bubbles when you talk about things being down 50, 60%. So the cheapest asset class is commodities. And historically, when you have a lot of money printing, eventually it leads to inflation. We seem to be having inflation coming now. And normally in inflation, prices go higher. And if you own the things that go higher in prices, wheat, silver, whatever, you do well. So I would say I own shares, but I would, if I'm anything I'm buying now, I think I would be buying more commodities than anything else because they're still cheap. They're still cheap.
You're comfortable with. Do you own stocks in the US, Jim?
Yes, I own a few. Yes, leftover from before. I don't think I've bought any US shares recently.
Okay.
But Rajiv, if you know some good US shares to buy, tell me. I'll do some research.
I'm pretty bullish on Tesla. I'm buying Tesla with my own
Hooray.
little money.
Hooray. I'm not buying Tesla. Go ahead.
All right. Just tell me this.
Partly because I don't know enough about it, but I do know it's extremely expensive, and it's not my style to buy expensive stocks normally.
Okay.
But expensive stocks can get more expensive. There's no question about that.
I'm just, kind of betting on the EV revolution or EV things unfolding. How possible in Singapore we'll see a lot of EVs coming in, and a lot of people buying India, Singapore.
Rajiv, everybody has to do their own way, and if you can make money in EV, do it. Don't listen to me. Do it.
Okay, cool. No, this love affair with China, this positivity with China. I mean, I've lived there, great country. How are you getting on with that? I mean, a lot of these Alibaba, Tencent, the way the government has acted, value destruction, so much. What's your view? Has your thesis changed?
Well, I owned the Chinese shares. I've never sold any Chinese shares. I bought my first Chinese shares decades ago. My view is that, China is going to be the next great country in the world. And someday my daughters are going to say, he must have been smart. Look at all these Chinese shares we own. If you'd sold your American shares 100 years ago, maybe you'd look smart for a day or two. But 50 years later, you didn't look very smart. And that's my view of China. I'm not trying to market time anything in China. Yes, I see the problems developing in China. I know China is going to have recessions. Everybody has recessions. I know there are going to be bankruptcies in China, and Beijing says we're going to let people go bankrupt, which is good. I hope they do. But I own shares, and I'm not going to sell any. I'm optimistic about the long-term view of China. Does not mean the stock market will go up every month, but I own Chinese shares for my children.
And do you want to talk a little bit about the Chinese shares or the sectors you own, Jim, for the benefit of people?
I'll give you some guidelines. Whenever there's a disaster, there are opportunities, and transportation and travel and tourism has been a disaster. So probably there are opportunities in airlines, hotels, shipping. I own Chinese wine companies because people stopped going out, people stopped drinking. So whenever there's a disaster, there are opportunities, which is something I have learned over the decades. And so that's where I would suggest looking in any country, including China now.
Okay. And what other countries are you looking at, Jim, favorably besides China?
Well, Russia's hated. I own Russian shares. I bought some more Russian shares recently, a Russian shipping company. I am looking for countries always. I'm not as active as I used to be because of doing other things, but there are certainly bound to be opportunities out there. As I said, Russia, China, maybe Korea, Vietnam. There probably are many opportunities scattered around the world if one takes the time to look. A couple of African countries have good opportunities now. Yes, don't give up. There are always opportunities.
And what kind of time horizon you normally look for? Is 5, 10, 15, or forever?
Well, history is pretty clear that when you have a bear market, things go down nearly everywhere for a year or two. So if you can time it, fine. I cannot, but I'm not rushing to buy now. As I said, American stock market, which is the largest, is at an all-time high, and it's the largest stock market in the world. So when there are problems there, everybody will be affected. And normally this lasts for a year or two. So I would say, if you're cautious, you probably should just wait until 2023. I don't know when, but wait for the bear market to come. And when there's panic everywhere and hysteria everywhere, then you should buy. so if you're asking me for timing, that's the sort of timing I see. I just know that history is very clear that when you have bear markets, they're not over in a week or two. It's usually a year or two or more, depending on how bad things get.
You retired in you retired in late 30s, right? And went around the world and all that. How did that happen? I mean, what investment strategy you took that time to generate that kind of returns?
Well, as far as going around the world, since I grew up in a small town in the backwoods, and people usually either never leave or they never go back. I wanted to see the world for whatever reason, growing up in a backwoods village. I wanted to see the world as long as I can remember. So I set out and did it. I retired early, partly so that I could have adventure, so that I could see the world. And the first time I did it on a motorcycle, because motorcycles are a lot of fun. Second time I did it in a car to do something different. But because of who I am, when I drive around the world, if I see an opportunity, I try to act. When I was younger, if I were walking down the street and something happened, I said, oh, look at that. But I didn't think, oh, well, I should act. There are going to be consequences of that, whether it's something good or something bad. So as I went around the world on both my trips, and whenever I'd go anywhere, I tried to notice what's going on around me, because it might lead to an opportunity. Not everything. And I don't do this to look for investments. I do it for fun, for adventure, for excitement. But as I say, because of the nature of my life, when I see something, I try to process it and think about it and maybe act.
Anything specific you have in mind? Any specific example to inspire? Do you remember anything?
Oh, many, yeah. Well, I remember when I crossed into Africa in Botswana on my first trip. I had driven through Africa, and Africa was pretty much a disaster of infrastructure and everything. And I got to a country where nobody asked for a bribe, where everything worked. The border crossing was very efficient. There were roads, there were signs, there were hotels, there were shops. So when I got to the capital, I said, what country, what is this? Is there a stock exchange? And there was. Then I went down and did my research. In the end, I wound up buying shares in every company on the stock exchange because I could see that this was a good story, and it was very cheap. And I don't think I'm some kind of big guy. I mean, there were only 7 companies listed on the stock exchange in those days. But, it was a great story that I happened to just see, because having crossed through many countries and seen problems everywhere, here was a place there were no problems. Well, there were problems, but I mean, where everything seemed to be very different and everything seemed to be working. So I got involved.
And it paid off.
Paid off. Yes, it paid off.
Okay. Now, Africa, I think you talked about Africa, you talked about, Vietnam also. I mean, I traveled to these countries. You didn't talk about India at all.
Well, Rajiv, if you can only visit one country in your life, it should be India. It is really an astonishing place. The man-made sites, the natural sites, the food, the people, the religions. I mean, you walk down the street and you just cannot believe everything is very exciting. The women are gorgeous. The women are always winning beauty contests, as you know. The men are striking and smart. So if you can only visit one country in your life, I would suggest it be India. I have invested in India at times, but I also know that India has the worst bureaucracy in the world. The Indians learned bureaucracy from the English, and then they took it to a higher plane, because the Indians are good at that kind of thing. Now, if you can find the right Indians, sure, in the right industries, but be careful, because there's enormous bureaucracy, enormous complications. It can be. So yeah, but back to my main point, if you could only visit one country, it should be India. There's nothing like it. Not even China. China probably used to be like it, but they had the Cultural Revolution and a lot of other things. There's nothing like India.
Where is Europe going?
Well, there are opportunities in Europe, I'm sure. I know. But, Europe is not cheap now, and Europe has high debt, has demographic problems. Most European countries have demographic problems. So I suspect Europe's still going to be there 100 years from now. It's always been there. I mean, good times have come, but bad times have come too. No, there are certainly opportunities in Europe, and some European countries are at least allowing immigrants, and they need immigration. Angela Merkel was running Germany, and a few years ago, she let in a lot of immigrants fleeing because she knew we don't have any babies. We got to get some people into this country, and that's a major problem throughout most of Europe. And it's getting worse, not better, and the debt gets worse, not better.
These days, if I understand, Jim, like your 30s, like that was like the era where, talking about like 4,000, 3,000% returns for you. And how do you live by now with the returns? What kind of returns do you look for these days?
Well, Rajiv, everybody wants to make as much money as they can, as fast as they can. Everybody wants to get rich this week. For goodness sake, that's why we watch Rajiv, so we can learn and get rich. I don't work as hard as I used to. In the 70s, I loved every second of what I was doing. I couldn't get enough of it, and I didn't have any money. But it wasn't why. I just loved it so much. Now I have other things I'm doing. I've got 2 children that I'm very keen on, etc. So, but as far as every time I see something that I want to buy, I hope it's going to go up 100% this week. They don't, but, and that leads me to a point. Everybody wants a hot tip, but hot tips are very dangerous. I'm constantly having people say, and I say, listen, you should not invest in what people say on the internet or the TV or something. Just invest in what you yourself know a lot about if you want to be successful. And everybody says, okay. But just give me one hot tip. Just one tip. But Rajiv, hot tips will send you to the poorhouse. Do not listen to hot tips.
It's such a legendary life. But what is the investing lesson you learned? Failure, some big failure which hits you hard even now?
Well, I've certainly had plenty of mistakes in my life. I can go on. We could have a few days about my mistakes. Early in the business, I got everything right, and I made a lot of money. I tripled my money in like 4 or 5 months when everybody around me was going broke. And so I started thinking, this is really easy. I'm going to be rich. This is so easy. The rest of that story is 6 months later, I lost everything. Because yes, I was a smart lad, but there was a lot I didn't know yet about markets, about other people in the markets. I assumed that if I knew something, everybody knew it. Well, it didn't take me long to find out many people did not know what I knew, and that they would act on their thinking instead of my thinking, and I'd lose a lot of money. So I learned there was a lot I didn't know about markets. I didn't know about stocks. I didn't know that stocks could do crazy things, no matter what the fundamentals. So that was an extremely important lesson for me to learn.
And how did you overcome that? What did you do about it?
Well, it was not fun. I mean, I lost everything. Not that I had a whole lot of money. I was a poor beginner in the markets, but all I could do was, some people run away and become priests or holy men or commit suicide or, change professions or whatever. Well, all I could do was go to work every day, save some money and start over.
Yeah. And what do you remember as a key investment which changed your life? I'm sure there are several things, but a couple of things which you think really proud of in terms of investing, a particular company or a particular mine or a particular wine factory. What comes to your mind?
Well, I've been investing a long time, so I haven't always made mistakes. I sometimes get it right. I don't know. I guess I invested in China long ago when most people thought China was still this hopeless, disastrous, backwoods communist country. And I said earlier, I've never sold any Chinese shares. I've owned some of them for decades. Commodities, I got right. I somehow or another figured out there was a commodity bull market coming at the end of the 90s, and that worked. In those days, most people didn't know there were commodity markets. And now, of course, everybody knows, but these were things that sometimes even I get things right.
Okay, that's very modest of you, Jim, though.
It's not modesty, Rajiv. I made a lot of mistakes, and I know. I know.
It's all right. I mean, in Russia, when you were talking about Russia, you talked about shipping, you talked about a lot of other sectors, even in China, airline, which are beaten down. In Russia, you have a particular preference for something, or is it the general theme across?
Well, in Russia, there are still many cheap stocks because everybody hates Russia. Russia is still pretty much hated, even though Russia has vast resources, doesn't have a lot of debt. I mean, it's not like the US or the UK or Japan or countries with staggering debt. So there are opportunities. Certainly, agriculture in Russia is a great opportunity partly because the US put sanctions on Russia. So every day, Russian farmers say, "Thank you, America. Thank you, America," because, the business is booming because there's no competition. Nobody can sell that food to Russia. And so the Russian farmers are doing well. I own Aeroflot, the Russian airline. Okay. Own shares in the Moscow Stock Exchange, because if I'm right, there's going to be a big financial industry someday. No, there are certainly opportunities there. I'm the director of a Russian fertilizer company called Fosagro. I mean, it's one of the largest in the world. Obviously, if agriculture is doing well, fertilizer is doing well. So there are opportunities.
And what kind of Jim, appetite you have? How long can you sit on your investments? I mean, for the gains, let's say if they're quiet for 3 years, 4 years, how long?
Rajiv, I'm lazy. I don't like to have to work. So I like to find things that I can own forever. That's the ideal. Now, of course, some things work and you have to sell them eventually because they go up a lot or the conditions start to change. But my ideal is to own something forever.
Your daughter is like what, 13, 14? My daughter is 15. If you want to give advice to these young people, 15 or 20 years, what advice would that be to succeed in investments?
Well, as far as investments, but it's the same for everybody. Only invest in what you yourself know a lot about. Don't listen to some guy on the internet. Don't listen to your father. You stay with what you yourself know a lot about. And if I could tell you you can only have 20 investments in your life, you wouldn't be jumping in and out of things. You'd be very careful and you would be rich someday. You may be boring, but be boring. You want to be rich, be boring. So my advice is stay with what you know. And that's not just for investors. And figure out your own passions. Many students say, what should I study? And I say, figure out what you love. And that's what you should study, no matter how absurd it seems to other people, especially if it seems absurd to other people. Stay with it. Stay with what you love. And first of all, those are the people who are most successful, Rajiv, because, they're having fun. They get up every day. They don't go to work. They get up and start having fun. And those are usually the most successful people. But even if they're not successful, they don't care because they're happy. Every day they're doing what they love. So I hope that I can teach my children to do what first to figure it out. Many people never figure it out. Or even if they do, they're afraid. They don't want to do it. They're afraid it might not work or the people will laugh at them or whatever. So figure out your own passions and pursue them.
Jim, just quickly, I just want to ask you, China, US again, and do you think China will be able to replace US as the number one power? I mean, do they have maturity there? I mean, economic might is one thing. Do you see that balance, how the balance is going to go?
Well, Rajiv, history has been around a long time. And one of the things that history teaches us is that whoever's number one today is not going to be number one a few decades or centuries from now. One of the lessons, probably the main lesson of history is people do not learn the lessons of history. You know, we had a president recently in the US, he didn't know, if he did know history, he thought he was smarter than history, and he thought he could change history. Well, I know that history is smarter than I am. And that's one of the things I have learned from reading history. And I do know, I'm an American and I don't like saying it, but America's not always going to be on top. America is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world right now, and it's getting worse. That has always led to problems, and it probably will lead to problems again. So I do know that somebody is going to replace the United States. You tell me, I don't know who it is. The Indians think it's going to be India. The Chinese, I don't either. But I'm just saying that many people think we will be the next great country. As I look around the world, the only country I see on the horizon at the moment would be China. They've got huge population, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they have a history. China is the only country in the world that's been on top 3 or 4 times. Great Britain was on top once. Egypt was on top once. Rome was on top once. But China has been on top 3 or 4 times. They've collapsed 3 or 4 times. Well, it's the only country I see right now that on the horizon that can be number one again.
Yeah, I think I agree in the sense that, you know, the pace of innovation in China is staggering, and digitization, the way it's happening. But I think what you know, if you look at the top 500 companies in the world, I think majority of them still lie in the US. The entrepreneurship in the US is huge. So I think that kind of sometimes I think whether, you know, China will ever be able to match that kind of thinking or that kind of risk taking, which US has.
Well, the US has a lot of smart people. Don't think we don't, and a lot of openness, not as much as they used to. But no, the US is a great story. The US became the most successful country in the 20th century. But along the way, we had many problems, huge problems, Rajiv. Civil War, depression, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
China's certainly going to have many problems going forward. There's going to be bankruptcies in China, which are going to surprise a lot of people. It's going to surprise me. And I just told you it's coming. No, there will certainly be problems in China, but I don't see anybody else at the moment that can become the next great country in the world.
Right.
But, you know, 150 years ago, nobody would have thought the United States would be the next great country in the world. And we did it. So maybe it's not going to be China.
All right, cool. How are you looking at these new trends emerging, Jim? You know, you talked about agriculture, you talked about commodities, but like these AI, blockchain, cryptos, how are you looking at these trends? Are you taking benefits from them?
Well, if you can find the great new technologies, of course, you're going to make a lot of money. And blockchain is going to change the whole world, change everything we know. It's very, very, very exciting. Blockchain. I don't know a way to play. I would like to find a small or medium-sized company that's a pure play in blockchain, but I know it's going to change everything we know. But Rajiv, electricity changed everything we know too. You know, it put a lot of people out of work and out of business. Blockchain is going to put a lot of people out of work and out of business. But blockchain is going to be one of the biggest and most exciting things in the 21st century.
And how are you looking at cryptos? Do you have a view on that, Jim?
Well, cryptos are entirely different from blockchain. The crypto people say that crypto is going to be the new money, et cetera, et cetera. My answer to that, and I don't know, I have never bought nor sold any cryptocurrency. My wife is very keen on cryptos. My view is that if and when cryptocurrencies become successful, the governments are going to say, no, no, no. Well, you know, America's soon, money in China is already on the computer. You cannot take a taxi in China with money. You have to have it on your phone. And you can't buy an ice cream. That's going to happen everywhere, including the US, which is working on it. Well, I don't think that if the US says, okay, this is money now, I don't think the US is going to say, but if you want to use that money over there, it's okay, use their money. That's not the way governments work. They don't like to lose their monopoly or their control. So I would just suspect that if they're successful, it's going to cause problems for them. There have already been many cryptocurrencies which have disappeared. As you know, there are hundreds of them now, and maybe we're going to have hundreds of cryptocurrencies going forward. I'm a little skeptical that that's going to happen, especially if crypto becomes competitive to governments and to government money, but we'll see.
Okay, I think just
but that's different from blockchain. I mean, cryptocurrencies use blockchain technology, but that blockchain technology is used
they can be two separate things. They can
blockchain technology used for many, many, many things. Electricity is used for cryptocurrencies too, but electricity is very different from, you don't invest in electricity because of cryptocurrencies.
You know, I mean, you've been fantastic. Which investors do you admire most? I mean, a couple of investors you can name.
I have no answer to that. Obviously, anybody who's good at it, who's successful at it, I admire and respect and try to listen to. But, you know, that changes as you go along. You know, if you're right now, for instance, I've told you I'm not very interested in stocks or bonds in most countries. But if you were telling me about commodities, I would probably listen to you. If you told me you knew a great blockchain company, I would listen. I would then do my own research. But I don't have an answer to your question. I like to hear anybody who's got, I guess the main thing is anybody who thinks differently. That's somebody that I want to listen to, because if everybody just said you should buy Apple, well, okay, I wish I'd bought Apple 30 years ago, but you know, telling me in August of 2021 to buy Apple is probably not going to impress me. But if you tell me something, if you tell me about a new blockchain company, I would listen if I can find somebody who's got new and original thoughts. So whoever it is.
So imagine I kind of come to you and say, Jim, this is a blockchain company I'm quite positive on. What questions will you ask me? How would you assess that blockchain company? You will look at, you know, what 3 or 4 or 5 factors would you look at?
Well, the same thing you look at for anything. Who are the people? Who's the competition? Does the technology really work? Is it unique? Or is it easy to replicate, easy to compete? Balance sheet, do they have a lot of money? Are they deep in debt? What's the cash flows? Can they survive? What are the applications? You know, these are the questions you would ask about anything, whether you came to me and said, I know a great new copper company or a great new blockchain company.
Question, any companies you admire, Jim? Any couple of companies you admire at this point of time, you know, in terms of innovation, in terms of what they've contributed to the world?
Well, there's a Russian shipping company I admire, not because of innovation, because it has been a disaster. You know, if I can find a disaster that's turning around, it's usually very, very cheap and ignored. Chinese wine companies, grape wine companies. I mean, most people do not know there are grape wine companies in China. I can remember when I was a kid, very few Americans drank wine. And now everybody, of course, knows a lot about wine. And that's going to happen in China, in my view. It's happened in many countries in history in the world. So the Chinese wine companies, the fact that they're there, I admire, because, you know, the Chinese don't have a history of drinking grape wine. Rice wine they love, but grape wine is different. those are a couple of areas.
So what I'm getting from you, Jim, I just want to summarize and correct me if I'm wrong. One is you're looking at pretty depressed assets, which are out of favor, but which have a future, which have potential. That's one thing you're looking at. In terms of stocks, bonds, commodities, you're looking at commodities. In terms of markets, you're looking at China and Russia with a lot of positivity and optimism, and a couple of other Asian markets. Is that a nice summary of what you?
Well, that's not bad. I guess I am optimistic about the Korean Peninsula. Once the 38th parallel opens, it's going to be a very, very, very exciting place. I would expect the 38th parallel is going to open in the foreseeable future. And if it does, that's going to be a very, very exciting place for 10 or 20 years or so. I guess that's the one thing we haven't mentioned. And if that happens, tourism, Korea has not been on the world tourism map ever in history for many, many good reasons.
Yeah.
But if the 38th parallel opens, maybe a lot of people are going to say, oh, I've never been to Korea. Let's go and see what it is. There's curiosity, adventure. And for many reasons, I would expect Korean Peninsula to be very exciting, but not yet.
So what's this 38th parallel?
There's North Korea and there's South Korea. They're divided by the 38th parallel for historic reasons. It's a fortified border.
Yeah.
Soldiers on both sides. Once the 38th parallel is open and it's not a war zone, in my view, the Korean Peninsula, an open Korea will be very exciting.
Okay, all right. I think that's pretty much it, Jim. I got what I wanted, and I loved.
Well, thank you, Rajiv. Let's do it again sometime.